Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Midwestern Marx live stream. Today we've got another interview segment with Diego Ruzzarin, who is a brilliant Marxist Spanish content creator who's amassed over 1 million subscribers. He's got that gold YouTube play button in the background there. So we're trying to learn from him, trying to grow from him, and should have a really fun interview today.
Thank you so much.
Cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.
All right, welcome back, everyone. This is going to be a fun one. I'm excited. We're all excited to talk with our friend Diego. Thank you for being here with us today, Diego.
No, come on. My pleasure, guys. Like I told this to Eddie the first time we had a conversation, but I was already a fan of the Midwestern Mark Institute before we even engaged. So this is a pleasure for me, an honor.
Thank you. The feeling is mutual, brother. And honestly, we come out of that intro, and even looking at it now, I'm like, oh, we look so young. It's weird, and that's only like 2 years ago.
You also have the fan that made it got you in a camera angle where you look like you're 13 years old and you're a little bit ahead on your puberty and you have a growing beard. But
yeah, we need a new. We should have like a contest to see who can put a new intro together. Anyway, we usually kick these things off, Diego, by asking a sort of autobiographical question. Right? You're a pretty big deal in Mexico, but of course, us Americans, we're mostly oblivious to the rest of the world most of the time. So can you tell us a little bit about who you are? How did you get started with Marxism and with your speaking engagements, YouTube content creation, etc.?
Sure, for sure. So my background is kind of weird, but it's also strange that right now I'm writing my latest book, which is called How I Fell in Love with Sofia, and it's like a kind of autobiographical, but of course, as any autobiographical work is fantasy, because you can never truly speak about yourself objectively. So I'm treating it directly as an objective fantasy piece of work in this new book. And I'm just writing the chapter about how I became radicalized. And it's weird, like I'm Brazilian originally. I was born in the south of Brazil in a city called Caxias do Sul, which is a very, very small agricultural part of the south of Brazil. It was mostly populated by Italian and German migrants that moved to Brazil in the early 1900s. Then after that, I had the opportunity to, because of family issues, my father passed away, my mother moved to Mexico. So we ended up as a family in Mexico, where I had to study. I chose to study design. Then I did my first specialization in experience design in Torino, in Italy. Since my family is in Italy, I wanted kind of to rediscover and reconnect with the old continent and find out some stuff. After that, I went to work for the corporation in Thai, and I was a PepsiCo employee for like 6 to 7 years. I climbed the diarrhea ladder really, really fast. I was really good at brown-nosing people and giving speeches. I discovered I had a natural talent to...
Wait, I need to interrupt you, Diego. I am so sorry. What kind of ladder was that?
The diarrhea one, the one where you have to brown-nose people in order to climb the meritocracy system, which is in place in the work environment.
I just wanted to hear you say diarrhea ladder again. That's all.
Yeah, well, it's nice to engage reality up front, with no rodeos and with the right metaphors. According to me, we need the right metaphors in order to engage with reality properly. So I was in the corporate ladder for a while. I climbed pretty fast. I did pretty good. I've been naturally good at entertaining. I had the opportunity to speak several languages since I was very young. I had a grandparent that had a huge library and collected books, and I came in contact with Beyond Good and Evil from Friedrich Nietzsche when I was very, very young. I didn't understand anything out of it, probably until my third reading after I turned 30, but I kept it with me for a long time. But what turned me into Marx, or what led me into Marx, is that I'm married. I have a wife called Alejandra, and we have 2 children, two boys. And the first one that was born in Brazil, his name is actually Paulo, since he was born in São Paulo, in the Avenue Paulista, in the Hospital Paulistano. So he was destined by material conditions to be named Paulo. And with all the joy that he implied in our lives, when he turned 2, he was diagnosed within the spectrum of autism, which we understand that that's not necessarily a diagnosis, but more like a description of behavior. And that did something to me and my wife. I think something that only a son can do to you, as an extension of your own flesh. It made us realize a lot of things about the world through his eyes, through his abilities. So my wife is a Lacanian psychoanalyst. She graduated from Spain. She specialized in Lacanian psychoanalysis, which is something I've studied a lot as well through her. My interest in psychoanalysis is only through Alejandra. And then the way I saw my son and his limitations, and the way he was able to interact in the world, and the way he was able to fulfill his will on the world, on the material world, led me to see injustice everywhere. And because of this paramount injustice that was for me now evident and absolutely unavoidable, I saw it at design, I saw it at urbanism, I saw it inside the company that I used to work for, I saw it in the workspace, I saw it everywhere. Like I saw all these places, roads, directions, positions, and constitutions that were not meant to include my son. Because the world itself has a logic of productivity and a logic of capital by the means of capital to the end of capital, and that's it. And the rest of the world and the rest of everything is secondary to capital. So I discovered Marx. I had the opportunity to get in touch with first Capital, volume 1. It got me really, really interested. I then got in touch with a lot of, let's say, neo-Marxists or even, let's say, new Marxists. And I fell in love with Zizek's way of doing philosophy, especially the way he was entertaining. Even if now I don't agree with him in a lot of his positions, the way he did philosophy was very interesting for me because he showed me that philosophy can be entertaining. And that got me into postmodernism. Then I read pretty much everything that is to be read that is important in postmodernism. I became a Deleuzian for a while, whatever the fuck that means. So I became vegetable, I guess. And then after that, I got into my postgrado, like post degree. And now
Graduate school.
Exactly. So, and now I'm studying post-structuralism and language theory. And I'm especially doing research into a materialist theory of language. That's my main focus of work at the moment. I'm in love with Maurice Merleau-Ponty. I'm reading a lot of like phenomenology, like bodily embodied phenomenology through the body. I also became fanatic with economy and politics. So I'm reading about socio-economical formations. I have the advantage of being able to read several materials in different languages and engage with different content creators such as you guys. And I think this privilege of having conversations in so many different countries. Also, during my work, I was based in Singapore. I lived in Paris. I studied in Italy. I came back to Brazil. Then I came back to Mexico. So I worked in Chicago for a while as well. So I've been working pretty much all around the world. And these stories, these conversations, these adventures, let's say, is what had led me to where I am right now. Regarding content creation, I was giving lectures before social media, to be honest with you. My first big hall lecture was opening stage for Barack Obama. Can you imagine? in Bogota, in Colombia, in a stage for 24,000 people in a football stadium. I gave a lecture about the future of food, which was my area of expertise when I was working for the industry. And it was a big get-together about top concern topics. Can you imagine? And the main speaker was Barack Obama. I was so dumb.
That's still a pretty cool story, though, to say you got to open up for Obama.
Yeah, I guess. Counts for something.
For sure. It's interesting hearing you talk about the effect that your child had on your politics. I know that's something that also motivates Carlos and Noah a lot. I just wanted to say I remember a thought experiment that someone gave us when Carlos and I were in college about thinking about the way that capitalism and even capitalist infrastructure isn't built for people with disabilities. Is like, imagine if everybody was born with wings and everybody could fly, and then all the infrastructure was built for people with wings, but you're born without wings. And that doesn't even mention the fact that capitalism is driven by exploitation and the extraction of surplus value, which becomes harder for people with certain capacities or the lack of other capacities. So, and we also did last point on that. We did a cool podcast once about Lev Vygotsky, who had all these ideas about the education system and the way that it needed to be tailored towards people's strengths and weaknesses to help them flourish. But yeah, definitely relate to a lot of what you're saying there. The next question we had is about the way that you start off your videos by calling your audience human capital, which is one of the most creative and hilarious names for an audience I've ever seen, saying that they're beautiful, sensual, and highly expendable human capital. So can you give us the background for that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it was strange for me because like when you start to like, because my going into social media was strange because I was like antagonistic from the get-go. Like I didn't want it to be the typical content creator guy, and I saw like everybody has these like greetings, like hello crew, like hey guys, hey gang, and I was like, what the fuck is that? Is it like a death cult? Like it was so weird for me, like, and the first thing I was like debating in my head by doing this is, what is the role of content creation from a Marxist? Like, what does it mean to be a content creator? Like, what do we intend to do? And potentially we can get into this because this is the part of theory that interests me. Like, probably the most interesting part of Marxism as an incognito for me today is the relationship of how does the dialectic let the idealistic superstructures influence the material basis. Like this superstructure and basis relationship. So how do ideas change the world? Do ideas change the world? Can ideas actually change the world? What does that even mean? And getting into that and reading Baudrillard and about the revenge of the object and the supremacy of the world versus the subject, I got into this conundrum and saying, like, what do I even aspire to? Like, am I going to convince people? Am I going to inform? Am I the best informed Marxist? People are much better than me at this. Like, what can I do? Like, what can I do that is unique to myself, that I can actually provide a service that is going to be widespread enough and important enough for me to actually spend time in this and get to something. So I thought about the very simple notion of class consciousness, which I think is strange because we live in an era where subjectivity is at stake. And I'm not naive enough to think that there is such a thing as a non-alienated subjectivity. I think all subjectivity is intrinsically alienated, but there are certain conditions of levels of alienations which are better or are bound to produce healthier subjectivities. Okay. So going into detail to this, there is one book that if I can recommend you guys, is a really good read, that is called Marx and His Concept of Men. And it was written by Roland Barthes, if I'm not, or Eric Fromm, I think. Eric Fromm.
Adam Schaff.
Adam Schaff?
Adam Schaff. Yeah.
Really?
Isn't it Eric Fromm? Yeah.
Eric Fromm, exactly.
That's the one that includes the 44 manuscripts.
Correct, exactly. Right. So it's from Eric Fromm. And I adore that book. It will lead me into Capital Humano, I promise. So the notion is that how do we come up with the idea of who we are? right? So following Hegel's dialectic of the master-slave dialectic is that for a free autonomous consciousness to emerge, it has to be recognized by another free and autonomous consciousness. So getting entangled into this dialectic of recognition, we form these master-slave relationships. But then the two sides end up losing or forming an incomplete, exactly that one, or forming an incomplete notion of subjectivity, in the fact that we want to be recognized, but we want to be recognized by someone we recognize as superior to us. Okay, but the problem is that somebody that is superior to somebody else wouldn't care about recognizing somebody that is inferior. So the dialectic of recognition is always a mismatch. And what is the main argument of that book, of the concept of man according to Marx, is that when the recognition dialectics lead into this misidentification, man will turn into the world to build subjectivity. So man will see itself reflected in the fruit of his labor. So this is the birth of the notion of how materialism forms a subjectivity, right? So we will change the world, we transform the world with our hands, and then subjectivity emerges. So humans, the idea of human, it's a dialectical relationship of our will imprinted in nature. That's to be human. To be human is to be able to transform the world to your needs, to build the world to your needs, right? But what happens during capitalism? What's the end result of true alienation?
Well,
No
this is exactly.
subjectivity. You know, like
Sorry, I thought you were actually asking the question.
Yeah. So yeah, it can be. Sorry, I tend to have long monologues, and interrupt me if you need, please. So the notion is that you end up with these fucked up subjectivities where you don't see yourself in the fruit of your labor. So you end up with no idea of what you are, with a society that is asking for originality all the time, with a contemporary culture that is asking for you to find your true self all the time, but giving you no means to find your true self. So in the end, in capital, we are not able to be fully human. In capital, we are only able to be human capital. So we are only human conditioned by capital. That's the only level of humanity we can aspire under capitalism, to be human of capital. But what is really interesting about this is that capital itself developed this notion of human resources, of, because capital humano is human capital, is exactly human resources, is the Latin translation of human resource. So that's what we are. We are not human. We are human resources. Because what? Because we are not ends in ourselves. We are means to an end. To what end? To the end of capital. To what logic? To the logic of capital. So I turned it into a joke, and I made everything to become this notion that we are the old dancing, old cheering shit of the world, like in Fight Club, like the Tyler Durden discourse. And I turned this into his head, and I made it into my own slogan, reminding people every day that they are loved, of course, that they're sensual, of course, that they're beautiful, of course, but that they are disposable, because they're not humans as an end in itself. And not, remembering Che Guevara. Like, one human life is worth more than the fortune of the biggest millionaire in the world. And we have forgotten this. Like, deaths and necro-capitalism has become statistics.
I love that, man. And I like that Eric Fromm played that role for you. And one of the special things he does in that book is reaffirm the humanist ethos behind Marxism. And he connects it to a long tradition back to Socrates and Christ and Buddha and other leading humanist figures. And yeah, that radical disconnection that's seen all throughout class society and intensified under capitalism, where our Gattungswesen, our species essence, what it means to be human, is so which is so tied to this process of objectification, of being able to creatively embody ourselves socially onto nature, is destroyed. It's separated, and that's a crisis. If you look at the original meaning of what crisis means in Greek, krisis means separation, and that's at the foundation of capitalism, both in the relationship of workers to their product, their labor process, to each other, and to what it means to be human, but also in the commodity, right? And in the later Marx, who has a more refined economic analysis of the capitalist social totality, you see that the germ for the general crisis of capital is already in that crisis of the commodity, that separation. So, yeah, I found that response of yours excellent. Does anyone want to say anything else before I jump into the third question? I don't know ahead.
Yeah.
I saw you
I
writing
wanted to
down.
Well, I wanted to get farther into the collective struggle for socialism and what the proletariat is, right? As the this is why he talks about the proletariat having a historical role to lead humanity into being humanity in this sense, right? That becoming class conscious, like you were saying at the beginning, is becoming aware of that alienation, right? And aware of the struggle that you're already a part of, as reflected by the way society goes about being society, or in the capitalist epoch, being this human capital. You got on this one point that I really wanted to get into, but then I was like, oh, wait, this isn't about me rambling on about Marx. So I just wanted to say that because it's brilliant. And Ilyenkov dives deep into this as well, who's a big influence on us at the Institute. And he sort of expands it into the entire relation between thinking and being, and the impossibility of creating I'm not going to go all the way into it, but yeah, it's brilliant. If you haven't read Dialectical Logic, read Dialectical Logic by Ilyenkov.
I'm going to give it a look. There's also a very nice essay, which not necessarily a book. I think it's like a 15-20 page essay that is called Necro-Capitalism Directly, which elaborate. I don't know if you guys have. I think it's an Indian or Singaporean Indian author that writes directly about, and it's a logical evolution. Like this, there's 3 stages of authority. Like we have this notion of sovereign authority, like pre-Foucaultian. And then we have the Foucault paradigm of punish and discipline. Then we have the Deleuzian paradigm of control societies. And the evolution of biopower and ethics is probably the one that is described in necro-capitalism. It's really interesting.
There's a South African philosopher that gets into that as well. The name is slipping, but he also has interesting works on what he calls the dialectics of superfluity, which reminds me a lot of the concept of human capital and the way that you use it, because you mentioned expendability, and the paradox there is that these people who are treated with the utmost expendability are at the same time the most indispensable for the functioning of the system and for the capacity of the system to obtain what it needs, which is to realize surplus value in the form of profit. So there's a interesting dialectics, a unity of opposite there, where the same people that are highly expendable are at the same time indispensable.
Necessary, fundamental. Yeah, it's weird. Yeah. It's weird to think, because when you mention it, Carlos, it led me to the conclusion of thinking that people have to remember that death was a punishment in a past paradigm. Life is the punishment of the future. Like to be kept alive is the punishment of the future.
Right. Yeah, I'm trying to think of this. I'll send you the name and some of his works, because he also writes on necropolitics as well in the context of post-colonial South Africa. But we've been already in a nice segue towards my next question, which is, as a philosopher, it's kind of a treat to see how much you incorporate philosophy into your social political analysis. And I wanted to ask, what role do you see philosophy playing today? And what role do you see it in connection with the class struggle?
Well, to begin with, I have to make this abundantly clear. I'm not a philosopher by any means. Like I've read plenty, and I'm completely in love with it. I can't stop thinking about it, but I don't have the title, and I'm highly respectful to people that actually do the rigorous work and have the title, especially to Marxists, because I think Marxists are probably one of the most dedicated branches of philosophy, if we can say that. I spent a couple of years in the critical school. And, to understand the role of philosophy is intriguing to me, because it leads me back to this question that I'm not able to answer. Like, do ideas actually change the world? Are we, like, where is the true autonomy of ideas? Because if ideas are a fruit of their time, we can only have those ideas that will reflect the material conditions that produce them. Is the owl of Minerva all over again. Is Marx owl of Minerva, to say it in a different way. It's Hegel is saying that philosophy is always late. Marx's way of explaining it is that whatever we come up through reason, through language, through culture, economic studies, at best will leave us to see the reflection of material conditions in our analysis, but not necessarily alter them directly. We will have to have a very interesting discussion about the notion of freedom. My notion of freedom is, I like to steal from Spinoza here, which is still a strong materialist. Spinoza's notion of freedom is that freedom is the subjective ignorance to the causes that condition us. This is freedom. So there's a high proportionality between the notion of freedom and stupidity or ignorance. The more you don't see what conditions you, the freer you think you are. So for me, knowledge, it's getting closer to the realization of freedom, in the sense of realizing how we are conditioned. This is the role of philosophy, is to see where are our shackles, in a more Marxist language. Like, if you don't move, you don't feel your shackles. Well, thinking is about moving. It's about putting yourself in different subjective positions. It's about understanding situations by a multifactorial analysis. It's having history. It's having class consciousness. It's understanding forces, power, politics. Seeing all these forces at play will show you freedom, even if it's minuscule, but it will show you true freedom. That's my reading of what I intend to do, what I use philosophy for.
That's wonderfully said, and the dictum there is that freedom is the recognition of necessity. Right,
Hegel.
Yeah, I was about to say the same thing. Actually, I was going to say, I think of freedom differently, but it's related. And speaking of Spinoza and Ilyenkov, by the way, Ilyenkov actually traces the dialectic back to Spinoza as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which, I mean, if you're reading Spinoza, you can tell, right? But I want to go. We're kind of probably going in deep on philosophy for a lot of people watching this. So, could you tell us a little bit about the actual concrete class struggles going on in Mexico right now?
Sure.
But for sort of observing it from the outside, it seems like AMLO keeps moving to the left, right? In positions concerning imperialism, he's one of the first to condemn the U.S. attacks against Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, etc. And during the Summit of the Americas a couple of years ago, for instance, the U.S.'s exclusion of this troika of tyranny, as John Bolton called them, the guy with the big floppy mustache, was first condemned and boycotted by AMLO, right?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on AMLO living right in Mexico there? So would you say he's actually advancing class struggle there, or playing a sort of materially progressive role, either directly nationally in Mexico or geopolitically?
Well, it's interesting, and it's also a very, very complex question. They say about Mexico that is too far from God and too close to America. And that provides the conundrum of Mexico, geopolitical positioning, and how it can say, condemn, or react to different situations in history. Just to give you an example, in the morning I had a conversation with a very good friend of mine, which I would love to connect you guys. He's an economist and a politic analyst. I don't know how to say it in English.
Political analyst.
Political analyst, exactly. And he's also a philosopher. He's two PhDs. And we were talking about Palestine and Israel. And we saw the map of which countries around the world recognize Palestine. Mexico doesn't recognize Palestine. And is one of the few countries in Latin America that doesn't recognize Palestine and doesn't have a Palestinian embassy in the country. So I think there are certain topics in which Mexico is bound by commerce not to engage with. And it's strange to think about. There's a level of insubordination that is tolerated and is even necessary to the hegemony. Like this notion of there's two levels of criticism. There's a level of criticism which is permitted by the system, and there's a level of criticism that is not permitted by the system. And I think Mexico plays, especially right now, within those two levels. And given the recent multipolar world that is emerging, we can say that certain freedoms are reframing. But in key issues, you see Mexico is very much aligned with the US. Like our commercial trade is pretty much dependent. If we exactly, Santiago Armezilla, wonderful guy. If we lose the opportunity to do commerce with the US, Mexico is lost. And I think we have, in a way, created this dependence historically, imposed upon us. The loss of territories, the loss of California, New Mexico, and the other Arizona and the other territories. It created this independence as a, this author Edgar Said from Decolonialism, like the notion of the other, from Indians, from the heritage of Anglo notion, constitution of self. It's like Mexicans have this history with the US, and it's very hard to get out of it. Even if, like, you see yourself in constitution with this dichotomy, this dependence, right? So it's hard to say that Mexico has any level of true sovereignty to engage in revolutionary politics. You're too close. Like, like I can quote Interstellar again. There's no life in planets that are too close to black holes, because nothing happens. Like, can you imagine and like a Marxist insurrection in Mexico? It's like Ukraine trying to join NATO. Like, Mexico cannot join BRICS. It's too close. It's too dangerous. So in that sense, I think people have to be very much aware of the type of populist rhetoric that has subversive tone, but that doesn't necessarily translate into any revolutionary action. Okay. So speaking about myself specifically, like divorcing from these more political macro scale issues, which even if I am a somehow influential figure in Mexico, and I've shown up in some lists that I really don't want to be in, I think the type of work that I try to engage with is, like, for example, I engage a lot with chambers of commerce in order to advocate for improvements for the working class directly, like increasing raises, better working conditions. And normally, I'm not even advocating for that, like in the streets with the people. I'm telling capitalists that they're dumb. Like, I'm being almost like an accelerationist and telling them, like, you guys don't see you're killing yourselves. But then, of course, it's kind of weird because we will get eventually into this debate of, revolution versus reform, and how much you can get out of both in different times. And then seeing everyday people and people that I know and that I love, it is that for somebody, revolution is already late. So you have to think about people. You have to care about people. Not throw yourself into martyrdom too quickly to say, like, I'm fighting the long-term battle, so my actions are justified. And if we have to lose some tactical battles, we'll lose them. Like, I don't feel that smart. I don't want to be the one to make those choices.
That's very interesting. We have a question here in connection to that topic of AMLO from Charles Brown. He asked, what about the recent nationalization of an important industry? I believe it was lithium. And there's talks about a supposed lithium OPEC with some Latin American countries, which I think will be including Mexico. What are your thoughts on that?
So yeah, well, you guys must know this by heart because of theory, but in bourgeois democracy, nationalization is just an extra step to libertarism. I had this conversation with Eddie last time he was on the channel. Like, the way I see it is that already bourgeois democracy, it's a type of anarcho-capitalism with extra steps. Like, politicians have sponsors, parties have lobbyists, companies have interests. Whatever happens in public policy is dictated by the interest of capital. So nationalizations within a government that is acting out the interest of capital doesn't necessarily represent a subversive movement. That's what I want to say. And we have to be very careful about those, because it's a sleight of hand where they can sound very nice, they can see very revolutionary, but unless it truly represents the interest of the people, doesn't really matter. because they will nationalize, but then they will do litigations, and they will delegate the operation to private parties, and like find ways to get the profits out, and it's not necessarily democratic decision making as well. So it's serving the interest of foreign companies. So no, nationalization by itself, it's a master signifier that is, according to me, dangerous for people to over-identify.
That's interesting, because it's so out of the realm of even political possibility here in the U.S., like nationalizing an industry. We don't even get to really see the different forms of nationalization that could play out. But I mean, that's sort of like what Chavez had to do. He didn't nationalize PDVSA. It was all the Venezuelan oil company. It was already nationalized when he took office, but it was being run by corporate Western oligarchs. So he had to renationalize it and kick them all out. So that's very interesting.
Before you go to the next one, Eddie, can I say something real quick?
Yeah.
That a lot of the people that think about nationalization in this very abstract form that can't seem to see the difference between nationalization in a bourgeois context and in a socialist context. I feel like part of that is rooted in this artificial and vulgarized reading of the relationship of the economic base to the state. It assumes that you can have, almost in a libertarian sense, that you can have this capitalism divorced from the state, and the reality is that it's not that. Capitalism has always necessitated the state, that the state has always been there when capitalism gets into these crises where it can't grow. In the U.S. specifically, without the activities of the Hamiltonians, we just spoke with Christian Parenti about his book, The Radical Hamilton, and the role that part of the American elite and founding fathers, the role that they played in promoting a sort of bourgeois nationalization and centralized development of the productive forces. So the state has always been central for capitalism. It's the one that shows up when it comes into its periods of crisis. And a lot of these people that just are cheerful about nationalization in general, they assume this dichotomy such that if and it feeds into this dogma that you hear that someone like Richard Wolff makes fun of, where socialism is the government does stuff, communism is the government does more and more stuff.
Yeah.
But that's not the case.
It's a lack of class analysis as applied to the state, right? The bourgeois state asserts itself as above all class contradiction when Marxism reveals it as a certain kind of state, right? And to sort of, this is why the Mensheviks, for example, were all about nationalization of key industries, right? But under a bourgeois state, because the bourgeoisie needed to play that role. There's a reason political conquest is the goal, right? The immediate aim, rather than us all slowly trying to become bourgeois and owning the capital ourselves, and then from there slowly making the state socialist or whatever.
Yeah, I think it's key what you guys mentioned to complement what I said, which is probably what you said is making what I said sound smart. What I wanted to add by this is to say that there's no economy without politics. There's only political economy. Okay, like when people engage into this idea of anarcho-capitalism, they have to understand that there's no property without state. The only way for anarcho-capitalism to make sense is if you a priori believe in natural law, which is metaphysical bullshit, to be honest. Like if you believe in natural law, then you can build this abstract notion of a market without politics, without state. Like even minarchists, they admit that you need a certain level of state to ensure the rights of property, to the fruition of contracts, and blah blah blah, like all this fantasy romantic crap. Like there's an intrinsic relationship between property and state. But here is where I find it really interesting. And this book that I'm reading, please read this. This is probably the best book I read in 2013. It's called China, Socialism of the 21st Century. It's also available in English. It's from a very good friend of mine, a PhD in economics, that is actually working right now with Development Bank of Peking in China. And he's a Marxist by formation and a historian by formation, which is amazing. And the guy talks about social economic formations with socialist orientation. socio-economical formations with socialist orientations. So talking about China, and this debate is very interesting, is one that I've been reading about a lot lately, is that, for example, out of the top 100 main companies in China, 61 are owned by the state. Okay, how is this different from any other type of nationalization? That the ownership of those states by the PCG is used towards improving the goals of socialism. Like if you nationalize a company, but to further increase profitability of a foreign investor or operator, then nationalization is meaningless. The role of nationalization is to further improve the material conditions of the working class. That will be a socialist socio-economical formation. Otherwise, is still fulfilling the needs of capital.
That's beautifully said. This is the point that Marxists, after Marx and Engels, people like Lenin and Mao have noted that in these transitions towards the first stages of socialism, politics is the emphasis of what you have to have in your analysis, and sustaining political supremacy. Mao makes this distinction between economic and political capital. He says, we cannot give up political capital to the capitalists at any moment. And then economic capital will treat them insofar as they can play a progressive role. We'll let them stay there. When they stop, we'll step in.
Brilliant.
And do what we have to do. The visible hand comes in.
I love the. I don't know if you have seen the meme, like the evolution of communist punishment. It's like at first we like Robespierre, like you execute the bourgeoisie at the main plaza with a guillotine. Then we send them to gulags very quietly, and they get executed in the darkness. Now we take them all their capital and we give them new jobs as workers. That's it. Yeah, like that's the evolution of punishment. Like, no, I don't mind about the guy, the owner Jack Ma from Alibaba. It's like, I don't care. I'm not going to do anything to you. Just work.
Dude was sending Cuba when the U.S. was preventing Cuba from getting syringes and respirators. He was donating stuff to Cuba. That's what even the social consciousness of some of these billionaires in China is different from like anything we see here in the U.S.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Now that I'm really engaged with the PCG in several levels and with different people, it's crazy, man. I don't think we don't even understand it. This is the living proof to me that material conditions give birth to ideas and subjectivity. It's insane. Like you talk to them, like I've had the luxury of traveling pretty much all over the world like a couple of times, but having these conversations, especially with academics, it's insane. It's really mold breaking. Like you look back at your life and you say, like what happened? It's crazy.
Wait, are you trying to say that it's not the consciousness of man that determines his social existence, but on the contrary, his social existence that determines his consciousness? That's crazy.
You see, Noah, somebody very smart with a very nice beer. Somebody very nice with a super nice beer once said that it's not about understanding the world, it's about changing it. That guy, that beautiful guy right there. Yeah. The real Santa.
Our next question is a little different, but I guess we've been speaking about the state. So we talked about the 2024 election in Mexico in one of our last streams, I believe. So are there any interesting candidates emerging yet? Do you have any feelings on who you're going to vote for at this point? What's your read on that right now?
You mean in Mexico or in the U.S.?
Mexico, yeah.
Okay, yeah, because we have two elections. Well, I had already the opportunity to interview one of the main candidates. I had a one-on-one with him, and I'm probably going to have more interviews directly with the candidates. But that's probably going to happen next year. I still don't have a definite answer for that. I think their political agenda is not solidified enough. They don't have a project yet. Like, we only started with marketing. And to be honest with you, I haven't voted yet in Mexico. I don't really believe in bourgeois democracy, to be fully transparent. Normally what I do in Brazil is that since Brazil has this 2-round system where you vote for somebody in the first round and then the 2 top candidates get voted on the second round, it's probably more interesting for me because I always get to vote communist on the first round, because there are communist political parties in Brazil. PC do B e PCB, Partido Comunista Brasileiro e Partido Comunista do Brasil. So I always vote on the first round and I support communist candidates directly. just because I know it's important for Communist Party to have a part in bourgeois democracy. But here, since it's a different type of democracy, like the main candidate is going to win, I don't truly feel represented. I haven't felt truly represented in the past. So I'm going to withhold my answer until I see what they're showing. But just because of the response we got yesterday out of the conflict between Palestine and Israel, I can already tell you that we're going to get 25 flavors of vanilla vegetarian ice cream, just with like slightly different adjustments.
Yeah, but that oat milk though, bro.
Oh yeah,
good as hell.
Delicious. So many flavors. Oh my god.
That's a quote that we're gonna plaster ever. Yeah, but that oat milk though, bro. Carlos
Put it on the shirt.
Yeah, it's true.
I
What do
have
you guys think?
Yeah, I have a question that I wanted to ask you, but if we want to stay on this topic a little more.
No, up to you. Go ahead.
Well, one of the things that Marxists have to deal with in the Euro-American context is the existence of a State Department promoted and created compatible left that talk radical, very radical, but that in substance always side with imperialism. As of the last decade or so, specifically in the U.S., a central component of this compatible left has been what we've been calling wokeism. The contemporary ideology of the liberal wing of empire that legitimizes imperial and neocolonial conquest on the basis of the backwardness of global South countries' positions on social issues. Are there similar problems such as these in the Mexican left? Are there in Mexico, as we call them at the Institute, forms of controlled counter-hegemonic lefts?
Yeah. So, well, I don't know. I will counter answer. I will counter question before I give my answer. Do you consider wokeism compatible with communism?
No.
So yeah,
Not at all.
I think we all agree with that. The issue is that woke is liberal. The antagonism is not left versus right. The antagonism is idealism versus materialism. That's for me the true antagonism. The antagonism in socio-economical formations is between communism and capitalism. This dichotomy between left and right is bourgeois pipe dream. Is two different flavors of the same ice cream. Doesn't really change much. I think the fact that we are so distracted by identity politics is to divert us from the actual hot topics that we should be discussing. The fact that nobody in this chat is ever going to own a house. We can identify as the gender that we see fit, even if we don't, even if we change our mind, and if we not receive all the rights we should regarding our sexual identity. The true thing is what is happening in the material world, as always, is ignoring our subjective and ideological positionings. That is what is truly frustrating for me. They're instrumentalizing a suffering minority in a lot of cases, like the LGBT community and race, gender, and all these marginalized communities. They're being instrumentalized in order to divert us from the truly important topics, which is the property of the means of productions, is owning the shit we need to live, which is what truly matters. It's crazy. When we see it from abroad, and it's confusing because in the US, you normally say left and right and Republicans and liberals, right? But for us, it's all liberal. It's kind of weird. You have everything in America is so complicated. You have one party, but you have two options to vote for them. It's so strange. It's so American. When you get to a Starbucks, you have so many options to get diabetes. It's like, oh my God, I can choose so many flavors of diabetes. I love this. It's true freedom, flavors of diabetes. It's insane. Even politics is like that. So for us, it's weird because when we think about it outside, I think that the true question that we need to have is which one of those is going, because as Lenin said, it's easier to fight our fight from a liberal democracy than from a right-wing dictatorship or authoritarian regime. In that sense, I'm aware, I know, right? But then again, if we go to society of spectacle, simulation and simulacra, most postmodern analysis of social relationships mediated through images. Today, we don't see how we are connected materially. We only feel connected through images. So we identify as groups, as genders, as colors, as races, and we have this desperate need for deeper connection with other humans. One of the 4 alienations is alienations to each other, that we grasp to these abstract metaphysical claims about subjectivity that can be changed as avatars in a video game, which doesn't lead to much. I think people need to reconnect back to what matters, to what, in a way, truly dictates the way they're able to live their lives.
That's
That's
really,
wonderful.
really well said, brother. I think also there's a big class component to this, right?
Yeah.
That these new theories masquerading as left come from corporate boardrooms, down through the middle classes, through their institutions, through the academy, through the NGOs, through the think tanks, et cetera, et cetera. And from there, work their way into institutions and organizations that back in the day had some genuinely left-wing leanings.
Yeah.
Right. And so what they do is we couple this with an understanding of the creation of what I always call the fake left over the last, the long 20th century, as they say, right? And the manipulation of language for this younger generation, right?
Absolutely.
So that when they think of the word left wing, there's this newer arbitrary set of characteristics that the more of them they check off, the more of these ideas they have, the more left wing they are, rather than a more materialist view of what left wing would mean, just meaning pushing forward society, right? And so all of this goes into their personal, subjective, individual identity that they create. But it's all, and to get back to base and superstructure that we were talking about earlier, it's all conditioned by pre-existing brands that sort of formed over the last period of history. And the brand that is left-wing must hate the brand that is right-wing, and vice versa. But like you say, in reality, it's all liberalism.
Yeah.
Right?
Are you familiar with the notion of kayfabe?
Yes.
From wrestling? Well,
right.
American politics is kayfabe.
Oh, I'm not. I thought you said K-waves.
No, kayfabe. Kayfabe is this notion that people that watches WWE or WWF, they know is scripted, but they have a suspension of belief. And that's politics. Politics in the US is a suspension of belief. You know, but you don't want to know, so you don't know. Is this the notion of unconsciousness? This is Zizek in Sublime Object of Ideology. You have you have an almost voluntary suspension of belief. Like you really don't want to get involved into the roots and the mud and the dirt and the blood and the sweat of what is necessary to change the world. So you engage into aesthetics.
And this is why it's such a middle class phenomenon, because working class people, the proletariat and what we call the reproletariat, right, this new precarious class forming in our era, don't have that luxury. Sort of, we are in this struggle and on the edge of a real class consciousness because it's necessary, because there's no way to keep going on in the old way.
Yeah, you're busy now. You're busy voting. You're busy canceling people on social media. You're busy virtual signaling. You're too busy to do something.
Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if bourgeois democracy is professional wrestling, is real democracy when we sublate that and move towards real wrestling?
Oh my God, it absolutely is. As a former MMA guy, yeah, absolutely, Eddie. There's some reality to it. It.
For sure, that's an excellent metaphor.
Yeah.
I really appreciated you bringing up the concept of cynical ideology and the way in which people suspend belief in order to continue acting. And this is something Hegel called collective self-deception, and he marked it as the moment in spirit's development where it's very decrepit, and like the spirit of a specific political community is just. It's losing its spirit. It's losing its right to existence and to be actual in a certain sense. And it's definitely present. And you were talking earlier about the hyper focus on identity and this form of subjectivism. And what's sad is that so many communists, people who claim to be guided by the dialectical materialist worldview, they fall for it, and they fail to see how deeply rooted in this Cartesian division of res cogitans, res extensa, the extended thing, the thinking thing, how deeply rooted in that it is, and it's in terms of its philosophical assumptions, it's bourgeois through and through.
Perfectly put, Carlos. I couldn't agree more. Like, the only people I hate more than liberals are idealistic Marxists.
You mean fake Marxists?
Those are the worst. Yeah, exactly. Those are the worst. I agree 100%. A lot of people also use these master signifiers, and then they expect the master signifier to do all the work. Like, I am doing social justice. I am pointing out the intern fascists. Like, I am pointing out the enemy. That's it. Like, it's enough. It's enough to participate in society. But this is also explained by how our relationships are so deeply dependent on the exchange of images, like ecstatic exchanges of images. Posturing is more important than doing. This is what I'm trying to say. In this era, posturing is more important than doing. Baudrillard's thesis of what is good appears and what appears is good. There's a one-to-one relationship between appearances and goodness. Like in this Aristotelian notion of the true, the beautiful, and the noble. Like, there is a one-to-one proportion. So in a society of spectacle, what is important is the appearance, not what is happening behind. But this is also us falling in love with our alienated selves, which is for me a disaster. This is what I'm really, really sorry about. Like, the people are so obsessed about this notion of finding their true selves and being authentical that they're doing exactly the opposite. Like, they're constructing faker and plastic and more plastic images of themselves, which is causing mental instability and just fueling the pharma industry.
Exactly. And what it is an explanation of the whole fad of pretending a bunch of things than arguing politics. There's nothing more irritating to me. I've spent decades studying Marxism than someone putting the little hammer and sickle Twitter profile emoji telling me what Marxism is and having no idea the actual substance of it.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if you don't understand what ascension to concrete means, don't run around telling everybody what is and isn't Marxism.
Exactly.
Don't run around arguing passionately. It's the appearance of being smart and the appearance of being moral and just that is important, because if actually being smart, moral, and just were the point, they'd be doing the work of educating themselves to be correct rather than just going off with it,
Yeah. No, absolutely no.
I wonder if you've had a chance to engage with the work of Hans-Georg Moeller and Paul D'Ambrosio on pro-felicity, but especially considering the comments you gave on Baudrillard and the role of images and the inversion of reality and images. They see it very much in the way that we think about identity today as the curation of profiles. And if you look at how the left, at least in the West, I don't know if it's the same thing in other parts of the world, but it's so deeply rooted in their profiles. And every time a new thing comes up, they must comment and they must satisfy the general peer, and they get these positive feedback loops from the general peer that tells them, when you post this sort of stuff, we'll like your post, we'll subscribe, and when you post this sort of stuff, we'll criticize you, we'll remove the subscription, we won't like it, we'll quote tweet you saying that you're a fascist or whatever the fuck. And it so affects. And what ends up happening is that if you're treating Marxism and socialism as an identity marker, the worst thing that can happen to you is for socialism to succeed, because then you lose your identity of being this countercultural fringe group. Exactly. You lose the identity of being the antagonist to the system. So there's almost like this perverse implicit acknowledgement that they don't actually want to win, because in winning they cannot sustain their identity, which is so crucial to who they are.
And probably, like, you're the one being, correct me if I'm wrong, being more close to like academic philosophy. It feels like academic left is in love with failure.
Oh, yeah. It's a fetish of defeat.
Yeah, academic left is in love with being submissed. Like to being sodomized. They love it. They love to lose. They love to roll and cry, and they love to criticize. It's the typical guy that doesn't recognize China, North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba. It's the typical guy, the guy that is directly identified with failure.
Right. It's why they worship, and I love Thomas Sankara and Salvador Allende, and they're a great part of our tradition, but you have these people who love them, but then they hate Stalin in China, and anybody who actually constructed socialism without being murdered in a coup.
Yeah,
exactly. I view it as rooted in the purity fetish, because only in those attempts that failed very early on was there not the opportunity for the purity of the revolutionary movement to desecrate itself, because they lost. So in defeats, there's not the opportunity to have to do the sort of concessions and do the sorts of moves that the left ends up then saying, oh, it's totalitarian, or oh, it's taking the capitalist road or whatever, because it's trying to fucking survive and develop the revolution. So
yeah, they have to. It's an issue. It's kind of hard to engage with people and discuss political theory if they don't have a historical materialist notion of history. It's weird. Like, you're talking with people that come with normative claims about values and moral, and it's like, what the hell are you saying? You know that the notion of good is changing daily? Like, do you understand how language works? There's there are some anchoring mechanisms between material reality and language, but words don't describe reality. It's so weird. Like, people take these words so seriously, and they come up with these transcendental notions of true wisdom, beauty, and virtue. It's like, what the fuck, man? It's like, like Socrates was bisexual. Socrates was bisexual. Like, does it make sense? Like, like, people need to read Bruno Latour and get into post-structuralism. Like, most of it's a pity, but most of lines of argument in social media are memes. Like, you engage mostly with meme heads. Like, people don't have ideas. They have memes in their heads. Like, 99% of their heads is filled with memes. Most of them are cats, and some of them are political and economical. But most are memes. People have meme heads, and they build this ontology of memes. It's insane.
And those memes are mass-produced for them as brands that they then fulfill. And that's part of what pro-felicity is, which I'm not sure if you I had to step away for a second if you explain that, Carlos, but that's exactly what it is. It's a predetermined personal identity that you get to identify with, right? And then you
momentarily
take in the same narratives as everyone else and then relay them. It's just the same meme war over and over and over and over again.
Yeah. And at the level of ideology and achieving consent, it means that the process of propagandizing has gone so much deeper, because who can influence these positive feedback loops from the general peer online? Well, the State Department. We know how they use 68,000 fucking bots to help overthrow and change the narrative on Bolivia through Twitter. So they can control the audience that then, through a dialectical interaction with that audience, you shape who you are. So it means they can virtually control the subjective formation of people's identities and get them propagandized to levels that never existed before. During the paradigm of authenticity, you had at least the capacity to separate the political activity you did from your real self. But now, since you are your profile and the things you put out online, it's so much more entrenched and so much more difficult for people to overcome these things, because it means losing themselves in changing their political opinions.
So you see, like, I came to this notion that common sense is synonymous with ideological hegemony.
Yeah, and that changes over time, right? Like you were saying,
whoever owns the means of production produces ideological hegemony, and that's common sense.
By the way, the Socrates thing, he rejected Alcibiades' his moves in the symposium. So I don't know. And Alcibiades was known for being a very good-looking man, but maybe he was bisexual. He was a very eccentric. He fought in the Peloponnesian War without shoes on, and it was.
And I don't think he was alone in that. Probably even in the academia and the liceo, I don't think he was alone.
No.
Speaking of
for sure, he was not alone. Yeah.
Speaking of bisexuals, BRICS is developing into a real could
How
potentially
do you go from bisexuals to BRICS? Jesus Christ! What a leap of the absolute spirit.
I'm just feeding the meme machine. I'm just feeding the meme machine. I'm working for my true master here.
But to go back into it, this one's actually a serious question. So BRICS, though, BRICS Plus now is developing into a force that can potentially challenge Western imperialism, and that would affect the ideological hegemony. Many on the Western left that we're talking about actually are very critical of BRICS, right? And with the bourgeois ideology they mistakenly call Marxism, they even call it imperialism sometimes, right? Considering it little different from the imperialist financial institutions of the West, which is just kind of wrong. You know, at least in our view. Our view is different. We see that although full of internal contradictions, especially ideological ones, that need to be addressed at some point, concretely speaking, it's a direct opposition against imperialism, objectively harming its material interests, and therefore aligning it with the working class within the West as well. What are your thoughts on this? And how is the Mexican left, where you are, reading the rise of BRICS?
Well, that's a lovely topic, Noah, and it was nicely put. So I would like to engage directly with the notion of what do we need to do and how do we must capitalize on this. There's decades where nothing happens, and then there's week where decades happens. Like we're there. I think we're there. We're seeing that time, which is so strange, but it's strange. Badu said that we need to be subjectively ready to see revolutionary moments. If we're not subjectively ready, we won't see revolutionary moments. We need to engage with theory in that sense, because it will give us the readiness to engage with revolutionary opportunities. And I think this is one of those. In what sense? The notion is that, and you guys know this, but a lot of people will. This is meme head opinion that I'm answering to. Is not to you, right? So we know that socialism can only come from capitalism. Communism and eventually socialism and eventually communism can only come from capitalism, because it's a dialectical evolution of the means of production. And what is evolved and developed during capitalism will then change ownership and change dynamics, and will lead us to different political organization modes, to socio-economic formations with socialist orientations. So what does it mean? What scares me is that during the late stage capitalism, the inequalities and asymmetries of power created a high difference in levels of development between the north and the south of the world. And I think China was the only one, due to the constant and rigorous work of the PCC, to actually develop their productive forces to be able to compete with capitalist nations. And that is necessary to take the next step into the dialectical of history. You cannot jump into pre-capitalist societies into advanced socialism. It doesn't work, because why? Because national sovereignty is maintained through force. And if a country is not powerful enough to sustain itself during the ages of transition, it will lose hegemony again. And we have seen this fail again and again and again and again. If you try a socialist movement, but you don't develop your productive forces, you fail. Okay? So what we are advocating for right now, and I have so many friends in different parts of Latin America, that we have our vanguards, our communist vanguards, is that we are advocating for a unified Spanish and Portuguese speaking world to actually invest and develop and be aware of the importance of developing our productive forces, our sovereignty, because otherwise you're too susceptible to embargoes, to commercial strikes. You become the next Venezuela. You just become instrumentalized to be the next public commercial to demonize the failure of communism. And we cannot allow that anymore. And I think in that sense, BRICS is the break-in opportunity. Why? Because of the Development Bank of China, which is giving loans and leases and investing in infrastructure into the south of the world with super good interest rates and without the shark loan attitude of mafia from FMI, the Monetary International Fund. So
IMF in English, yeah.
IMF, sorry. Yeah. So there is a viable way for us to invest and develop our productive forces. I had the opportunity to work for 3 years in Singapore, and I was working with MICA, the Ministry of Information, Communication and Arts. And I founded a company in Singapore. 50% of the shares have to be in the name and belong to a local Singaporean. China has been doing this for decades, stealing know-how, teaching workers, investing in education and quality of life. So of course now they're competing directly with developed Anglo and capitalist superpowers. Of course, but it's different. It doesn't matter if the cat is black or white. Is that it hunts mice. I'm a big Deng fan. So like in that sense, like we have to understand the importance of developing the productive forces, but to further the intentions and the agenda of the working class, but to be able to sustain our sovereignty. And a lot of our region, specifically Latin America, was Balkanized. We are the Southern Hemisphere Balkans. Like small countries, fragmented, susceptible to coup d'etats, with huge debt crisis we work half of the year to pay the interest of the debt, which is insane. Half of the year of our tax collection is to pay the interest of our national debt. It's insane. It's ridiculous. We're never going to get out of it. How do you expect to develop productive forces and to be competitive and a powerful nation if you're in debt and your debt only gets bigger and bigger? So what we have to think, and this is why I love the opportunity of BRICS, is that we have to climb on board. We have to invest into development. We have to build up the sovereignty of our nations. We have to defend our interests, our national interest of natural resources, the people, furthering our national agenda. We have to strengthen those. And one of the ways to do that is to create a Spanish-speaking bloc. Then it will give us so much more power of negotiation. When we speak about the Amazon, they want to separate the Amazon from Brazil. How convenient, no? How convenient to separate the Amazon from Brazil. And how convenient that is already a part of it is in, Bolivia and Colombia and Venezuela. And how convenient, no? Because of course it's a resource that everybody wants. And fragmentation, it's very much concordant with the logic of capital. Very much concordant with the logic of capital.
And I think that showed in the way that basically the same thing happened in Africa with what people call the scramble for Africa, where these places were divided, and oftentimes the borders.
African Spring, I'm calling it.
African Spring, I like it. Yeah, I mean, you have borders that were drawn based on the Western colonizers carving up what resources they want, and oftentimes they'd split entire societies in half into different countries. So, very interesting point.
Yeah, it's Nkrumah describes it as a central component of neocolonialism. You have to fragmentate these people so that it's virtually impossible for them to be self-sufficient. And the only cure to that is coming together in the context of Africa as a form of Pan-Africanism. In the context of Latin America, it's the unity of La Patria Grande, or Nuestra America, as Martí used to call it. That's the only thing that's going to work. And at the end of the day, whether it's in its capitalist form or in its feudal form or ancient slave democracy forms or whatever, the best way to sustain power is to divide and rule. And that's what they've done with these parts of the world. They've divided and they've been able to successfully control them. And in order to fight that back, we have to, in the same way that in our class struggles nationally within our nations, we have to ask for and fight for the unity of our working class. In these interregional struggles, we have to fight for the unity of various countries against imperialism. That's the only way that we're going to be able to successfully fight off.
Yeah, and if I may add, Carlos, you see, like this fight against pulverization of ontology is the fight. That like this is clash consciousness applied to geopolitics in a way. It's divide and conquer in realpolitik. Is divide and conquer in realpolitik. Why? The balkanization of sovereign nations lead to weaker states that are easier to conquer by the logic of capital, because the logic of capital wants less resistance. And Governmental intervention is a resistance to the logic of capital in a way, and sovereignty is a stronger resistance to the logic of capital. But that also works on the micro level. In a way, how do you expect to build a consciousness of a working class if everybody's hating each other on the basis of metaphysical identities? So you see, the victory of wokeism is breaking the class consciousness. Wokeism is antagonistic to class consciousness, because first you have to identify as a human, are you able to exert your will on the world? Yes, then you're a capitalist. No, you're a proletariat. The rest, it doesn't really matter. Who cares what colors is the guy that's driving the tank over me? Who cares what's the gender of the people bombing the poor Middle Eastern country? Who cares? Like what we have to identify, that's why Marx's favorite sentence from philosophy, and by coincidence, and I found out this late in my life, our favorite sentence in philosophy is humano sum, humano min alien puto, is I am human and nothing human is alien to me. That is humanism. In that sense is humanism. In that sense, there's nothing that separates humans. Their ability to exert their will on the nature is what is giving us the title of humans. Nothing else. You don't have to own it. You don't have to earn it. It's not determined by the color of your skin or your sexual preferences. It's the fact that you can exert your will on the world.
And this is sort of what brings us back to class and the essential nature of unity of our class, which it drives me crazy. The wokeism is just ontologically tribal, right? It wants to separate everybody by the nature of what they are, rather than bringing us together as humanity. And it's a class project, right? This is why it needs to be pushed onto us from above. But we get taken for it. And I don't know how it is there, but in the US, the last period of our history, the entire left was middle class. And you see, there's people in our chat right now that I vehemently disagree with, but I stand with them anyway. And those conversations can be debates. So long as we stand together for the working class to do this fight, all that becomes secondary, because what we are is working class people.
Yeah, we have to build towards collective consciousness on every level. Like we have to fight metaphysical fragmentism and fragmentation on every level, because this is the fight. This is what Marx meant by that everything is solid is melting to thin air. This is what it means. It means that capitalism breaks down everything, because it's a system with a logic of autopoiesis that is perpetuating only itself, and everything else is disposable. And our fight is the struggle of collectivity, is the struggle to build, to coerce, to connect. That's why I love Spinoza. That's why I really try to connect back to Spinoza, because there's nothing that is, innocuous. There is nothing that is true autonomous. It doesn't make any sense. What the fuck is autonomy? But it's hard to teach people to challenge the notion of autonomy, because it goes against merit, it goes against originality, it goes against celebritism, it goes against guilt, it goes against responsibility, it goes against modernism. Like what we have to destroy is the modern project.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. To go back to your response to the question on BRICS, which I think we're fully in agreement with. One of the things that's missed by even the people that have this very vulgarized understanding of class struggle, that just say, okay, look, these countries in BRICS, some of them are not socialist, therefore why would we support it? Is that in anti-colonial projects, it's always like one of the first stages is like the national bourgeoisie playing a progressive role in the movement towards socialism. We saw that in China. One of the 5 stars in the Chinese flag is the national progressive anti-imperialist bourgeoisie. And I see a little bit of that in BRICS, but it's also true that when these countries are able to obtain sovereignty by delinking themselves from the global financial system, US-dominated financial system, the same thing happens as when in countries themselves, within national context, you have advancements in democratic struggles. And the Leninist tradition is very clear. When you win democratic victories for the working masses, that makes the class struggle more acute. You can't blame all these different factors, and the only factor that it's very right in your face that you can blame is the capitalists. And I think that something similar is happening at the international level with BRICS, that in their victory, even those countries that are developmental non-socialist states, you're going to see the class struggle within those places become more and more and more acute. And as far as the point on wokeism, we say this literally all the time. Like, it's not just anti-communist or non-communist, it's reactionary.
Yeah.
It's deeply rooted in a tribalism that is anti-enlightenment, anti any principle of a common humanity. And if you trace it back to its philosophical forebears, it's the people they draw inspiration from, you go all the way back to the reactionary thinkers that rejected the Enlightenment. Then you get it in a reinterpreted form in figures like Martin Heidegger and Carl Schmitt. I mean, if you read some of these
who are
journals,
Nazis, by the way, for people listening.
Yeah, everyone's quoting Schmitt, like if you want, and Heidegger, and yes, they have some things that are helpful, but these were people that were Nazis and deeply anti-humanist, and then Foucault and the postmodern tradition, which accepts a whole lot of that and is deeply anti-humanistic in that specific sense. So, in terms of its world outlook, it's very clear that its substance is reactionary, the rejection of a common humanity, which has always been part of the ethos behind liberation projects, but it's got this facade of being progressive. It's a tribalism, little different from the old school racist tribalism, but with a progressive facade.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add to connect back. You see, like, this is the notion that is constantly coming back to me, in the sense that it was through my son that I got radicalized. It was only through the inclusion of those that had been ousted that you truly feel what community is about. There's this sentence that I absolutely adore that changed my life. It's in Spanish. I don't know exactly how to translate it. Those who let others take care of them give meaning to the caretakers. This is the dialectical of recognition. Taking care of others gives you meaning. You want to find meaning? Fight for others. The lesson of Hegel is that how do you expect to be recognized by somebody that is not as free as you are? Fighting for others is fighting for your recognition. Like, the way you fight for yourself is through others. Like, the concept of otherness is so important to me, because there's no such thing as individuals. This is a metaphorical liberal abstraction. There's no such thing as an individual. When we think about our respiratory system, we tend to think we have lungs and trachea and a throat and whatnot. But what about trees? Your respiratory system can only do half of the work. What the fuck are you saying? You're not an individual by not a single centimeter of the word. It's insane. We're not individuals. We were always codependent. We were always a collective. We were always inserted in the world. There's nothing. No, there's no individual before anything. There's always something before us. So it's insane that our way of building a communitary movement is by inclusion, not exclusion, and segmentation. Segmentation will get us nowhere.
That's so interesting. I had a conversation about wrestling with my wrestling buddy the other day, who's not a philosopher or anything, but I'm like, isn't it weird how some people think all onus is on the individual? Like, we're in wrestling, which is supposedly an individual sport, and nothing you do is individual. It's constantly about seeking out better partners, seeking out better coaches, trying to put yourself in a better environment, because as Noah mentioned earlier in the stream, it's our material conditions that determine us. And this idea that we're individuals, or you could achieve anything, by pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps. I mean, ironically, that's impossible. Like, even the metaphor of pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, it's physically impossible to pull yourself up.
Marx used to make fun of liberals. He said that if they were drowning in the ocean and they didn't believe in gravity, they will not drown.
That's good. But even your oh my god, I'm blanking on the system with your lungs. I'm sorry, I have a memory issue. Respiratory system. Yeah. Even that isn't just connected to the trees. It's connected to your cardiovascular system. It's connected to your nervous system. There's all of these interpenetrating relationships, and people are just the same. Just like there's no individual without the community that gives rise to that individual, there's no community without its relationship with society at large. There's no society at large without its relationship to nature. And on and on and on.
And what you said, which was beautiful about us being able to really express our freedom, a sense of meaning in life through what we do for others, it's a deeply Hegelian point. And just to add to that, part of the conclusion of that dialectics of the Lord and bondsman is also a very materialist point, which is through labor at the end is when the bondsman can recognize his own self, and it's the bondsman that ultimately ends up being able to rise to subjectivity, but winning subjectivity. But I wanted to also note that it's the opposite is also true. In oppressing others, we are ourselves in a position to never be able to establish ourselves as an autonomous subjectivity, and that goes back all the way to Dioniso Yupanqui. And I mentioned this in last night's AMA stream. A Peruvian indigenous that in the Cortes de Cádiz mentioned that quote that we have come to attribute to Marx, Engels, and Lenin as a cornerstone of the way we view self-determination, national self-determination. But it goes back to these indigenous traditions, and a people that oppresses another cannot themselves be free. In the same way that in order for us to be individually free, we do that through working with others, because there is no I without the we.
Yeah, I agree.
Oh, sorry, I muted myself. Getting towards the end here with our list of questions, but I just wanted to ask, Trump began his campaign here in America positing himself as the pro-peace candidate, talking about ending the war in Ukraine. But now he's floated this plan, also supported by neocon politicians in the United States like Lindsey Graham, to invade Mexico, supposedly to only fight the cartels. And they say that this is to fight a war on drugs, when in reality, a lot of the addiction that we're seeing here in America has been created by the American pharmaceutical companies, NGOs, the medical industrial complex, you could call it. So, what are your thoughts on that? And what's, is there a lot of buzz in Mexico about that or not?
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of talks about that in Mexico. I've confronted the candidate that I spoke with. I asked this direct question to him because he used to be the chancellor of Mexico abroad. He was the one in charge of like international relationships and a lot of the geopolitics that went on during the past period before becoming a candidate for the next election. And I think it's a fundamental question. Just like I said, like since Mexico is so dependent on this relationship to the U.S., whatever is foreign policy of the U.S. regarding Mexico is going to heavily affect our capacity to survive. And here is where it gets interesting, according to me, because Trump as a figure, it's interesting to say the least. But I think his speech has, in a way, sustained this Mexican scapegoatism. Like before was building a wall, now it's about invasion. But it's very populist. Like not to say fascist, because kind of fascist, but not necessarily. But blaming the other for everything. There's an other scapegoat. They are stealing our jobs, they are raping our children, they are the ones doing the killings, they are bringing the violence. It's so kayfabe. It's so easy to just blame everything on the Undertaker, or it's so easy. It's so Hollywood to just blame everything on one villain. But it has worked because people are desperate, undereducated, and they love pop operas and movies and Michael Bay explosions. So it's easy for them to, the boogeyman strategy, it's easy for them to just scapegoat using Mexico, right? But I think the change in his rhetoric is interesting. He became more bellic. He became more in line with the military industrial facility, in the sense that now talking about invasion, okay, cool. So the arms dealers like Trump again. And probably his sponsors are pushing for bellical Republican. I don't know if we have seen this yet, like a truly bellical Republican. Because we have seen a lot of warmonger Democrats, I don't think we have seen a modern or a postmodern Republican that is in love with war. And probably Trump can be one. Because if he negotiates with all the arm dealers and the industrial complex and he gets the right amount of money, he will push wars or whatever. He doesn't really care. Like, he's the short-term guy. He's the worst businessman. He will make short-term money and then break everything in the process regardless. So it's weird to see him like keeping the same scapegoatism or boogeyman strategy as you said, but then picking fights and in a moment where the US is really in a hard place, huh? Because like I've spoken with economists about this, and out of nowhere, the US can suddenly find itself with too many dollars, too many printed dollars coming back home. You know, like it's not the disaster of being poor. Like, people have to understand this. Imagine all the money that is abroad coming back to the US because nobody else wanted it, because people are trading in other currencies, and you lose the hegemony of the SWIFT exchange system. Then what's going to happen? With all those massive influx of cash back to the US, looking for profitability, and with the stacking of property that is in so few hands under BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street, it's an apocalyptic scenario. Eh? But then what happens is that no empire in history has gone down quietly. They tend to go down in a spectacle, and we're too close. We're gonna get splashed. You know, we're gonna get splashed with some diarrhea at least. So I see Mexico in a very, very dangerous spot because you know, I think it was Kissinger that said this, that the only thing that is worse than being U.S. enemy is to be his ally. So I think in that sense, Mexico is too close. So if the U.S. really struggles for food, air, and resources, we are the country to be invaded. And drugs and cartels and whatever is going to be the perfect excuse for them to do it.
Scary.
Yeah.
The soup brain Kissinger speaks some wisdom.
Soup brain.
As Eddie called him a couple of days ago. Yeah, that's very interesting. And, you know, he really did make a whole bunch of people believe that he was going to be the anti-war candidate. His rhetoric on the proxy war against Russia wasn't the worst. It was a hell of a lot better than the liberals. But, you know, we knew there was no substance. You know, when he was president, he killed Soleimani, he brought back the sanctions regime against Venezuela, bragged about having almost gotten them to the point of being able to take their oil again, brought back everything against Cuba. So it was obvious to a lot of us, but you know, the liberals love Trump. You know, for how much they hate him, they also love him because it gives them a reason to posit themselves as the lesser of two evils, and that's their only election strategy ever. And so they keep Trump alive. Like all of these attacks on Trump and attempted imprisonments, it helps him feed his narrative to his base, which is that he's the anti-deep state candidate. We know he's not, but when he's getting fucking jailed, it makes it harder on socialists, which are the only real anti-deep state, if we want to put it in those terms. It makes it harder for us to pull from the Trump base because they could be like, yeah, well, if he's not anti-deep state, why is the deep state coming after him and imprisoning him? So yeah, it's there's so many contradictions at play, or so many apparent contradictions at play. But with that note, I wanted to switch to our last question. It's become very clear to anyone who can see two fingers in front of their face that Ukraine is losing their counteroffensive and that we're on the tail end of this proxy war against Russia. What do you think this Russian victory or this US/NATO defeat means for geopolitics, and how is it being read in Mexico and by the Mexican left?
Well, it's interesting. Like, I don't want to speak for the Mexican left. Like, I already find this concept rather problematic. And if I may give a recommendation, there's a thinker in Spain called Gustavo Bueno that has a whole school of political thought. It's super interesting, and they have these notions of historical lefts, and what they call the sixth wave of the left is the extravagant left, which is where wokeism fits in. It's the non-defined left. It's a left with no political project, right? So before that, there's other lefts. And there's even the Asian left, there's the Jacobins and whatnot, okay? But wokeism and like a lot of all this, Gustavo Bueno, of course, we have to mention him. And we have to, because in a way, a lot of his theory makes us understand clearly that using the term left can be complicated in a lot of debates, right? So if the left doesn't have a clear political project, it's just extravagant left. So it's just, it's just posturing. It's not really left. So saying that there's a Mexican left for me is complicated because of that. Like I'm thinking in Spanish and I'm translating into my head, who do I call left in Mexico? Okay, there's no such thing. Okay, so I cannot give the answer. That's why I made the little caveat. But if I want to say, what does it mean for us, the war in Ukraine? It's interesting because of course it will move interests and it will open up possibilities, just like like what's happening in Israel and Palestine. This is also heavily connected to the fact that the US is picking too many fights. Like the cost benefit of Hamas to fight back against the government of Israel was probably too high before. But now it's probably affordable. Like now Iran can get involved. Now the Muslim world can get involved. And it's probably affordable to open up a different war front and like wear down the US military machinery, because there's too many fights at the same time, at the time of no productivity, and Europe is in recession. There's business deals going on without dollars. So it's an interesting moment. So my reading will be exactly that, and that what you put in the screen. There's a lot of people saying that the weapons in Hamas are coming from Ukraine. And also one of my friends, a Brazilian politician, a political analyst, is saying that this could be a false flag attack due to the internal instability of Israel. Because, like non-Zionist Jews are infighting with Zionists, and also Netanyahu is losing power internally. So there's instability, and having an external enemy, it's a good excuse to bring up nationalism again. Like it's Spinoza all over again. Nothing is innocuous. Everything is connected. What we have to be able to see, as Badu said, we have to be subjectively ready to see revolutionary opportunities. And this is what I see in the Ukraine war. Like, I'm not going to go into self-determination versus defense of borders. I don't want to go into legality of war and whatnot. Of course, NATO's expansion provoked the response of Russia. This is obvious and absurd. Anybody not seeing that is just a meme head. But then again, what does it matter for us? The window of opportunities is what matters. The window of opportunity is what matters. What does it imply in the shift of power? And what does it imply for us to invest in? Like I know a lot of people that are Russian. I have very good friends that are also Ukrainian. I have some refugee friends that are stuck in the US for like the last 4 years and cannot go back home. And I feel sorry for them. This is horrible. But like, am I going to cheer for Putin or Zelensky? No. I want to see what I want to do about it. What our countries can do about this.
Yeah, I feel like I don't want to get into a big debate about the proxy war, but from the perspective of someone in Mexico or in the US, the real solution is the Western ruling class to stop preventing peace. Basically, I mean, Ukraine was negotiating and they sent Boris Johnson to sabotage it.
Yeah.
People are dying, real people, know.
Right. That's the point.
Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to say real quick, that's the point I've been making, because people get what they accuse you of if you talk about NATO's role in the conflict and the proxy war as being a Putin propagandist. It's like, I literally do not care what you think about Putin and, even the launching of the intervention. We can have that conversation and talk about the legal justification that Russia gave. But as an American, look at what NATO's doing. Look at what the NED is doing. Look at what the State Department is doing, and fight against that. Right? It's not that hard.
And look at the material conditions of your working class and where you're using your money. For God's sake,
Yes.
it's insane. It's ridiculous that at the same time, you guys are being used as a poster boy for a zombie apocalypse on the streets, and you're sending all your money to the other side of the world to fight a war that has nothing to do with you. This is the living proof that you have no functioning democracy. Like, in the stuff that matters, the workers have no say whatsoever. We don't vote on anything that matters. We just vote on bullshit static issues that nobody cares about. This is the core of the problem.
Well, and then we're led to even do our activism into those bullshit issues that don't matter. I mean, what got publicity last year? But no, there were a couple that were just so big that they mattered. Like when George Floyd was murdered, right? That was a big deal. But like the things that they propped up out of nowhere, like the Netflix walkout. Why do I care what the opinions of certain PMCs at Netflix think about Dave Chappelle? Why is that something that was pushed for months? You know? It had nothing to do even with the working class people within Netflix, you know.
And
you just don't care about the class struggle of corporate lawyers, Noah.
Yeah, exactly.
Our infrastructure is destroyed. I mean, if you travel around the Midwest, if you go to small cities and towns, it's fucking falling apart. Yeah. It's rated a D-. So it's very clearly, as Parenti would say, it's the empire feeding off of the republic. Everything's going to fucking shit at home, and we're still messing around and doing what we have to do to uphold the interest of our corporate overlords.
You know, this is something interesting that I read lately, that it's almost impossible to make normative claims unless you have a common goal. And even if we can debate on the legitimacy of common goals, we cannot give ourselves to the will of something that has no goal. This is capitalism. Capitalism is us trusting in a system with no goal. And it's a system with an internal logic and a material logic that is to reproduce itself indefinitely, that is using us as resources. And if we don't resist that instrumentalization of humans, we not only first get reduced to less than human, we become human capital, but then eventually we become fully disposable. And there's a full automacy that doesn't need us. You know, like, this is what people need to see, is that we lose every aspect of this battle to automatization. We lose every aspect of this battle to automatization.
It's the logic of a cancer cell, just reproduce for reproduction's sake. But Diego, this has been phenomenal. We're going to have to do this again. It's been super insightful talking with you. Is there anything you'd like to plug before we head out?
No, I don't really do that. Like, on the contrary, like anybody that came here to see my white face once again, please follow these guys, support this project. You guys know that I go into every channel to speak about Marxism and to further the platform and the cause and to connect to good people. I was already a fan of Midwestern Marx, the project, even before you guys invited me. So it's a goal for me to be here to discuss with you guys. I'm a big fan of the way Noah replies on Twitter. Since I'm normally a douchebag that I lose my temper immediately. Like, every time I read you, Noah, I'm like, oh my God, like, this guy is like the reincarnation of Buddha and Marx. It's ridiculous. You are the best. I truly inspire to be like you. Noah, like the fact that the way you conduct yourself and the way you say we have to live our lives in order to be, uncriticizable is truly inspiring. And how you effort yourself and you connect your body to your brain and you work both at the same time. And Carlos, you representing our Latin heritage in the US, in the belly of the beast. It's making us proud, to say the least. So thank you guys for the invitation.
Thank you, brother. Yeah, definitely. Noah walks the walk, and we're so proud to have him on as one of our directors, a real organic intellectual. But without further ado, thank you to all that watched. Thank you, Diego, for joining us. If you want to stay a couple of minutes after we roll out the international so we can talk, that'd be good.
Sure.
Eddie, you do the clicking of the international. Thank you to everyone, and we'll see you next time. Solidarity.
Bye, everybody.
racial injustice and economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.